at the station and in the audience at the time asked for, and there were so many, and it was one of the ones we didn't get to last time. And in fact, it has been written. Here is the cleaned up, expanded, corrected version, plus honorable commentaries and analyzation by guess who. Once he became civilized, man's neurons announced to the rest of him, to us no longer applies the routine laws of nature. And although this is not so, on this basis, man continues to properly operate. Epilogue, and silently doth swoon in envy and amazement all of the beast at the very sight of man. Back to the news item itself. Once he became civilized, man's neurons announced to the rest of him, which is, in a sense, redundant, because that is what being civilized is. But we simply added a little verbal meat to the reality of it, that his neurons said to the rest of him. You can look at it individually, and you can look at it en masse. And don't write me and tell me there's no such. Collectively, then, that all of man, humanity, collectively, his neurons, his civilized part, immediately, just as soon as they got going, just immediately announced, by the way, no longer to us applies the routine laws of nature. And although not so, man continues to properly operate on this basis. Back to sort of the middle part of that. As soon as man became civilized, his neurons said to the rest of him, remember, individually and en masse, his neuron says, what ho, by the way, by the by, en passant. His neuron says, by the way. No, see, they just got to talking. That's what the news item says. That's why I'm getting excited. It didn't take a long time. Just as soon as they got to talking, one of the first things they said, news item didn't say that, but hell, I'll go ahead and tell you the truth. One of the first things his neuron said to the rest of him was, to us, no longer applies. Think about it, no longer applies. They just started talking. They just got there. To us, no longer applies the routine laws of nature. What was the rest of him going to say? Well, now, first off, the rest of him, if we're talking about all parts, non-neurally, the rest of the parts can't talk anyway. But assuming they heard it, they're mute, but not deaf. Let's put it that way. What would they say? They never thought about it. Plus, it's not true to them. If the routine laws of nature no longer applied to them, if that were true, it'd be suicidal. That doesn't mean, well, the end of the world's here. If it did not in some way naturally apply to them and they just took it upon themselves, that they just assumed or they now imagined, or maybe just tried to copycat and went, well, us too. They no longer apply to us. As has been well established here in our laboratory, that would be the end of them. Because if there's anybody the laws of nature apply to, by God, it's nature-based things. I don't know how much better I can put it. In other words, just the basic human physical needs. It would be, by any definition, a form of walking about insanity for a man's appetites, for a man's physical needs, which are no more than, to put it very directly, the basic laws of nature in action. For a man's hormones, that part of him to say, well, the laws of nature no longer apply to me. I guess they could say that, but we're not talking about the middle class. We're not talking about sane people. We're not talking about the healthy guts of life. So it's just, they couldn't say it. Now back to, we'll assume we've covered that. His neuron said to us, to the rest of him, his neuron said, to us no longer applies the routine laws of nature. And though not so, man continues to properly operate on that basis. I believe, but I know I would certainly like to leave it. I said I was going to believe that we'd just skip on, but I would like to leave it there. Because think of everything potentially explosive and perhaps revealing in the last part, that last sentence fragment. And though not so, that is, that neurons are free from the laws of nature, from the routine laws. I knew I wasn't going to stop. All right. How about the routine laws? What if they just assume, or what if they're stating that they are now, being as singular as they are compared to the rest of man, the spleens and colons and lungs and all that, that as singular as they are, then perhaps they are now under the auspices of special laws. Not routine laws, but now something special. Because what are neurons? If you ask neurons, you ask a man's mind, is there any great distinction between you and a gallbladder? Now, if you got a decent brain at all, your brain's going to say, "Are you kidding me? Are you nuts? Are you trying to be insulting?" If it was a serious brain, are you trying to be insulting? And of course, it was really a serious and sophisticated brain. It might go, "Well, no offense to my fine neighbors south of the border, down in my yucky parts, but up here in the penthouse, that's a ridiculous question." We are under the control, direction of special laws, new laws. It would take new laws to apply to us. We are not the old, uncivilized, pre-verbal part of man. The mind can sure say that. Now may I point out, the mind sure can say that. Am I a rhetorical fool or what? That's all the mind does say. That's the basis of all, here we go, religion, psychology, philosophy, and major professional sports. I know some of you will confuse free agent with the concept of free will. That's why I put that in. Now that you've had your chief laugh, may I point out that I tricked you. There is no difference. It's the same thing. That is, they're both under the control of routine natural law, regardless of what sort of agent you might have representing you in your dealings with the team owners. The whole idea of free will, back to where we were. All of this, when I said religion and politics, we're talking about free will. That is what neurons say is their exemption from natural law, from routine law, routine laws of nature. That's what it says. That's what any reasonable, middle class, ordinary, sane mind of any person says. That whatever you would classify, I'm talking for it now, whatever you would classify as being routine laws of nature, those basic, those routine, those mundane, those pre-established, those historic laws of nature are not, you cannot say that that covers adequately our operation. And I say I'm trying to expand it and to be a little more charitable. The original story was more to the point. They just announced what to us no longer applies the routine laws of nature. There is all of civilization. There is all of man's institutions. But don't forget the last part that says, and though not so, we're going to have to give a whole new definition to any notion of non-sequitorization. Of course, you people who are going to write me about Mosley can also write me about non-sequitorization. Just, save postage and complain about both of them on one card or letter. It's to take the sentence that says that the neuron said that no longer applies to us the routine laws of nature, and the last part, quote, and though not so, okay, and though not so, that is, they're incorrect, and though not so, on this basis, man continues to properly operate. I could suggest, and I will stop this one, rather than just leaving that as insinuating that it could be a non sequitur, or ordinary minds would say that at best it is. What if it's not? What if this is just, I'll just make up, just shoot into the dark? What if this would be, instead of it being some rhetorical non sequitur, what if it might be closer, the reason it sounds so strange? And you could only dismiss it if you're an ordinary person on the basis that it's ridiculous, it is self-contradictory, it is indeed a non sequitur. Rather than that, what if the reason that would seem so non sequiturized is because it is perhaps one of the last or one of the supreme undiscovered laws of physics? What if that's closer to the gut? Their great search for the grand unifying theory. What if that's closer to it? And instead of just man and neurons, that everything that man does, instead of now just man and neurons, how about man and technology? How about man and science? How about man and telescopes? How about man and particle accelerators? Now, I know if you're listening now, it sounds like I'm mixing up verbs and services and goods and nouns. It's all the same thing. That is, what if the whole question of the universe, let's get scientific now, instead of back to the definition like tonight of religion, a child's map of the universe, then you can say, well, all right, then science, a precocious child's version. Which I guess would make the scientifically inclined feel a bit better. At least they can look down their snoots once again at the religious and go, ha. But even the scientifically minded, they are still looking for the answer. The religious, say, the answer, we found it, is God. And then, of course, they all look at each other like, it is, isn't it? It is, isn't it? The scientific go, well, the ultimate answer is the question of what is the ultimate answer, and we're narrowing it down. What if the ultimate question and answer, though, is this? That is the very questions they think they are looking at, the very problems, of how can you explain the paradoxes extant at the quantum level. Why can we not find the basic law, or several, that will bring in all of the current various laws of physics, and explanations, and theories? Why can we not narrow it down? Why can't we seem to get any closer? What if all of what their so-called questions are? What if all of their questions are this? That is, now instead of the neurons saying it, I know it, well, you guys are getting good. I know I'm switching it from apparently literal, or at least physical, even if this was allegorical, I'm using physically, neurons. What if it's not, go past neurons, what if the questions, even scientifically as they call it, the questions of the universe is this, or the questions are the one, that the universe is saying the laws of the universe do not apply to us, and although that's obviously not true, the universe continues to run on that basis as far as man can see. Well, I know I was hoping for a lot. That the universe itself is saying, of course that's not what it's saying, that's not the way men interpret it. And they believe that the interpretation is getting better. Technology is getting better, there's no doubt about that. We're not here to criticize that. But they believe they're getting closer and closer, and yet in reflective moments, even great scientists will say, well, I'm not sure we're any closer than we ever were. We got better measurements, or we got different measurements, they seem more precise, but I'm not sure that we have any more idea of what the universe is about right now than Galileo did, than Plato did, or Aristotle just, sitting around noodling his mind, believing that the universe was on the back of a rose petal, or, that the spleen was the seat of thought in man. The man, boy, we've come a long way, except have we come that far? And so what if the questions are why it seems so difficult of trying to get this narrowed down, and is that the universe itself, what they're calling questions, what they're calling the problems, the paradoxes. Was that a comment? It's Captain Irony on the way to the bathroom. Well, I wanted to clear. Sometimes he's mistaken for a passing paradox. And of course, once he said he passed one, but that's not. What if the questions? What if all of it is on the basis that the universe itself, in essence, is saying, this is to man now. We're not talking objectively in some way, or I'm trying to give you some sort of religious or metaphysical falderoy. What's the plural of falderoles? But just, we're talking about from man's perception, his best perception. I'm giving you can fill it in, whatever the current best scientific approach is. They would still say, no, we haven't answered all the questions. Whoever right now is the singular, if there is such, cutting edge of cosmological theorization. That one man would say, well, I'm not a lot closer than I was when I started. I got a few more information. I've had a few thoughts on mine, but I'm not that much closer. So his perception, his and collectively all of man, their perception seems to be no closer to a final grand unification theory. An explanation of how did it all start. Yeah, we call it the Big Bang, but where'd the Big Bang come from? The real Big Bang. Yeah, all right, but where'd that come from? How about the Super Big Bang? That. What if the reason it can't be answered is the universe itself, in essence, is saying to man's mind now, to his neurons, that the universe is saying, the universe that you now perceive, which is a whole new universe, the universe that man's neurons perceive is not the same universe that a beaver perceives. It is named the same universe that a man's hormones perceive, if we could cut it here and we could in some way actually detail a perception at the hormonal, at the silent level. But the universe is perceived by man's hormones, we will say, is singular on this planet. It is unique to man. What if the universe he's perceiving is also simultaneously, it's never been analyzed this way, is saying to him, aha, now you're beginning to discover us. And let's tell you the most important thing about this universe. Now it says this universe, but it leaves out this universe that you're perceiving. Now you can tell somebody that and they'll go, well, yeah, but go on. See, they blame it on man. They say, yeah, I know that argument about whether I'm being subjective or objective or that the observer is always part. Hell, I know all that, but go on what you're saying. Okay. So what if the universe is saying to man, what this just said, that the universe is saying to man, in essence, the universe you perceive here is not limited by the old laws of nature, by the routine laws. That what you're perceiving, being the man, being the singular entity that you are, what you're perceiving now is not what your forefathers, the uncivilized, the non-neural, or chimpanzees, other primates, the universe you're perceiving is not the one they perceive. We are, the universe, is still talking to man. This universe that you now perceive is no longer, it is a separate universe, it is a different universe, it's an expanded, and what you're perceiving is no longer subject to simply the routine laws of nature. And any civilized man, in fact, the more civilized he is, the more to that he would give lip service or finger service. He would say, yes, that is true. I'm not sure I understand it, but that's got to be true. What if that's why nothing can be answered? Because, back to the last part, that though not so, it started out that it was saying, though not so, what the neurons say. But what the universe seems to tell man's perception of it is that this part, the part you now perceive, is not subject to the routine laws of nature. And though not so, man continues, the universe, as he perceives it, continues to properly operate on that basis. Now on to some of tonight's news. Attributing to man certain human attributes is one way man tried to ignore certain other specific attributes of local conditions. It's almost the same thing. Well, think how much of man's time, philosophically, religiously, moralistically, in a more subtle manner, politically, of how much men talk about and attribute to one another, quote, it's got to be quote, human attributes. I mean, the more civilized you are, that's the only thing you talk about. The more civilized a man is, you don't talk about the non-human attributes or characteristics you might have in similar quality to animals, rutting. Oh, I know you can call it romance. No. But the more civilized you are, you don't sit around and talk about sex and crude bodily functions and digestion. You talk about things that are singularly human. You attribute to man these great human attributes. This news item pointed out that, I think some of you already, you already got the gum out of the wrapper. The thing is, by attributing human attributes, there's a certain kind of, may I suggest, just for dramatic effect, a certain kind of sardonic twist to that, to say, by attributing, quote, human attributes, even when you're putting a quote on it, raises some question. But by attributing to man certain human attributes, charity, concern for one's neighbor, love and sympathy for the downtrodden. Now, all of these, whether they are actual operational fait accomplis or not, the more civilized you are, the more you attribute it to people, and you say, we should be. Perhaps I'm not as charitable. Perhaps I do not worry about my fellow man as much as I should. But I know that I should. I suffer over not doing it. And I'm sure my fellow man does. Some of them perhaps are a little less under control of human attributes than they are some of the lesser, cruder attributes. Be all of that as it may, the punchline of this news item is, in attributing to men certain, quote, human attributes, is one way men try and distract themselves, try to ignore certain other, shall we say, unsavory characteristics of actual local reality. All right, do I have to go back to what it takes to be a good magician? Yeah. Right? I want you to understand, I have nothing in this hand. Now, I want everyone to see that look, I don't mind showing it to you. I'll show you right there. Okay. Now, and of course, well, there's nothing in that hand, but that's not the hand I'm working with anyway. So I wanted to show, there it is. Look right over here, we have human attributes. I mean, they're right here. And if you look, then you don't see that they're picking your goddamn pocket and just being crude. You don't see that life, local conditions, has its hand in its other pocket. It's reaching down inside its coat to do the gaff on you, to get the hook, the pickle. It says, look over here. Here's what you should be doing to keep you from looking that local conditions make this, how should we put it? How about impossible, and get it over with? And for those of you who are still somewhat of a sissified mind, how about improbable? You like that better? Here it is, we should all be our fellow man's, our brother's keeper. Huh? Deny it. And if you're civilized, you can't deny it. It makes you want to hunker down. Especially since you know you hadn't really been doing it enough. You can barely keep you, much less your brother. But it says, look over here. What's the purpose of human life if not to help your fellow human? Look over here. And you look. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, yeah. That's to keep you from seeing other certain local conditions which make it improbable that you're going to do it. For those of you of super non-sissy mind, that you can do it. Yes, but look. Yeah, you're right. I could have made it cruder. I guess I will. Shall we get symbolic? I mean, we've lasted through metaphors for a while. How about symbolic? How about the purpose of man being man is so he won't realize he's not man? An intellectual housekeeping tip. Finding it impossible to rid themselves of their roaches, one family began painting all of theirs bright, cheerful colors. My first comment is, huh? You didn't take some kind of damn nap and you didn't leave out the modifier, an intellectual housekeeping tip. That's not human attributes. That's not saying, listen, you know darn good and well, if you'll pardon my crude language, you know darn good and well that we should be trying to help one another, not leading some sort of selfish, sensual life. Or it may be fun. I mean, you individually. But you know you shouldn't be doing that. And you go, yeah. Guilt. It's just another name for roaches. And so this one family, after realizing, of course, we're not speaking about your run-of-the-mill, Ward and Brenda Beaver, Cleaver, who the hell. We're talking about, I submit to you, a non-routine family. But when they realize you can't get rid of roaches, you can't get rid of what is run through the collective nervous system of man, of saying, well, human attributes, singular. The neurons of man, not subject to routine laws of nature. I mean, it's the non-neural part, the non-spiritual part, the non-human part of man who might go along with just physical, sensual pleasures. Yeah, as much fun as they may be. But it's the human attributes, the neurons. That's what we should be pursuing. See? Right over there. No trick. There it is. My hand's right and open. The truth is right before you. We should all be better people. This one family realized the guilt, the idea that you should be better at some ordinary level, is the same thing as having roaches. You can't get rid of them. They painted theirs bright, cheerful colors. There are two ways I could have gone with that. One is the way I started to, and if I was going to back up, could have made it sound, I could have used that as an example, which is what the original news item was, of no importance now, but the original was tied in with some others tonight, had to do with that you could look at from the ordinary view that is what morality is, that is what entertainment in the city is, that is what collective intelligence is to realize that my whole life, not to be offensive, and it's not, of course, pessimistic, but from an ordinary view, the mind says, Jesus, life is nothing but a bunch of rats and roaches, headaches. I guess some of you will be glad we won't have time to get into that news item about the difference, another distinction between man and some of the higher, or all the higher primates. At any rate, the ordinary mind, all you got to do is hint at all. Hey, is life like just being overrun by roaches? And almost everybody goes, well, yeah, to some degree. Even in penthouses, you can't get away from them. They're just, of course, what they're saying is, do you realize that no matter how well off you get in life, how well you do, what neighborhood you move to, what possessions you have, do you realize that life will follow you everywhere? Of course, they call it roaches, dust, for those that are really sissy. Perhaps can nail up their baseboards and keep roaches at bay. Dust will still get in. And if it's not dust, it's even worse. It's age. Nobody ever notices stupidity. I'm getting older. And you keep waiting for somebody to, just accidentally tell the truth and say, God, I'm getting older and dumber. But they let it go. They say, boy, am I getting older. And if you show any interest, like, well, where's the other shoe? What's the rest of it? And they go, boy, I'm getting older and fatter. They'll even go for that, but nobody ever says, dumber. At any rate, humans notice, given the least opportunity. Would you like to define what least opportunity is? All right, it won't take but a second. They're breathing. With the least opportunity, humans will admit, yes, by and large there is, if you want to say it symbolically, I said symbolically, that no matter what happens to you in life, you got roaches. Let roaches represent symbolically, and for those of you of a weaker mind, metaphorically, anything you don't like in life: doubts, guilt, ill will, aggression, fear. From an ordinary view, you could say that people understand that this one family, let them represent all civilized people, that they got to the point shortly after leaving Eden, which is when roaches started, by the way, because in Eden you didn't notice roaches. Before you could talk, there was no such things as roaches. They might have physically been there, but before you could talk, nobody could go, oh, goddamn, a roach. You understand? They were just there. It was only after you could talk and you got out of the garden that suddenly you look down and there it is and you go, ooh, a roach. Or, ooh, an accountant or an insurance salesman. A rabbi. Oh. I certainly did not mean any offense to our good viewing audience who might sell insurance. Do you understand? I was going to give you the two versions. The first one could have been that this one family represented the development of civilization, wherein they took all of that seemed to be of questionable benefit, if not downright annoyance to man, depicted by roaches, and what did humanity do? It verbally painted them bright, cheerful colors. Huh? That's not, all right. What's a real bad roach? Once you got out of the garden, you could talk. I submit to you, for an ordinary view, one of the real bad roaches is for somebody that you know, like a good friend, is to lay down and die. For a family member. I mean, that's a roach. Huh? And what has man done? Ah, yes, but if I continue pouring some money in here in the church or the temple, after I die, I won't really die. And the people that died, they're not really dead, and we'll all get together somewhere. Be a street party, and everything will be all right. Now, we're talking about a serious repainting, or a serious painting of roaches. I mean, that has got to be the ultimate in, quote, looking on the bright side. Yeah, everybody in the world up until now that's died has stayed died. Everybody. Yeah, but not me. Come here, Bubba, and help me paint these roaches. But that would be one view, but I ended up doing it sort of backwards if you didn't follow. I was almost taking another closer to our kind of view of it, that is, and I was going to leave it at that tacitly, but now that I've given you the cruder version, the other version would be from a non-standard view, is that you do repaint them. But now we're talking about it at a different level, and you're talking about willfully, not out of stupidity, is you ignore. In other words, you stop the roaches from being roaches. All right, I'll put it to you directly. You quit thinking about things that there's nothing to be thought about them. How about death? If you don't know any more about dying than you know now, forget it. I'm not saying there's anything else to know, but, goddamn, give yourself a break. If you can think at all, but now you realize, well, everyone who ever told me anything about death, you just try and you can look at your mother, father, your priest, your rabbi, and with no offense, if you can think, you can look at them even if they're dead and gone. You can go back and look them just momentarily in the eye, all of life, and you realize They don't know. They did not know, or they may not, if they're alive now, they do not know anything. It doesn't matter what. I mean, death just sounds grave and solemn. That's the same thing. You realize, well, no one that's ever told me anything. Collective intelligence amounts to zip. It's roaches. So why think about it? Paint them. I mean, you're surrounded by roaches. Paint them and then forget it, is what it says at another level. Paint the little boogers, and then from now on you don't worry. Death runs around and well, how cute. Lack of reputation, insults. Oh, look at there. You got more tapes rolling? Yeah. You okay? I got to do that. Well, I'm going to. I got to is rhetorical, dramatic. It was an item from a prison newspaper. Hard time news for those doing hard time. A civilized man is a sissified man. Now, I never have gone to this, and it doesn't matter. I guess it's too late for us to worry, but if ordinary people or somebody at TV... I'm not even going to speculate what they might think of as being sissified man. Any of you who are older than 30 or 40 can probably... I don't know. I'm not even going to explain it. A civilized man is a sissified man. The only thing I would say is it's got nothing to do with sexual orientation. How about that? For anybody that's old enough, that's not what it's referring to. And that's a fact, since I'm the one that made up the term. Well, I'm the one using it. So here we go. I wanted to, this goes into it, gets a little lengthy here, more than one sentence. But according to those in prison, the convicts, they put out their own paper. I assume that no one's trying to worry about, I wonder if he's referring to Attica or Alcatraz. Look around. Oh, local conditions. A civilized man is a sissified man. But then the next paragraph says, an outsider's addendum to that news report. Not only are we all veterans, does anybody remember that? That there was, it said, what do you call the veterans of the life of war, the struggle, the battle of life? And the answer was, the living. And the living wouldn't say that. They say, oh no, the war's not over. That's right. They keep saying, God damn, there are roaches everywhere. They don't realize, hey, it's over. What you're calling roaches, what you're calling the battle of life, if you think there's a battle of life still going on, it's over. You just don't know it. The difference is, if you know it, how shall I say it? You know it. Not only are we all veterans, but ex-cons as well. Just to bring this up to date. Third paragraph. Over by the west wall, a thrice convicted paper hanger sniffs and observes, well, then if a dead man is no longer a, quote, civilized man, then a dead man should no longer be placed in that same old sissy category. That he's saying, well, if you're dead, you're not civilized. That's it, forget it. It doesn't apply, you can't say anything. Of course, that's not true. I can describe that a dead man is the closest thing to a civilized man. But it's another story. He says that if a dead man is no longer a civilized man, then a dead man should no longer be subject, limited to the classification of being sissified. He's insinuating that there's something afoot here. Last line. Fact. The human brain starts off. And you no sooner got out of Eden, the brain got to operating. The human brain starts off as a soft, runny organ, and men mostly just make it worse. So now I'm doing a man thing about, now wait a minute. Not only that, but what in the hell does sissified mean? What is actual civilized? You're just making it worse. Not really worse, because it's not going to get any worse than they're looking at this, but you understand of going, trying to massage it with collective fingers. It just makes it worse. It gets gooier and runnier. Or, as the father told the child tonight, or in the city, forget the idea of ambrosia over there. The intellectual food of the gods is soggy burgers. He said it. I just want to read this one. A simple mind can be a happy mind, as long as it never even suspects that it could be otherwise. And a viewer, evidently fairly contented up until now, writes to tell us, why don't you shut up? I mean, Ben did it great. I wasn't complaining, but I just wanted to hear it again. A fairly contented viewer. An aspect of life, if it had occasion, if local conditions didn't have anything better to do than tune us in, would go, why don't you shut up about that? Of course, it would be saying it it'd be a double-pronged observation or request. Not only, why don't you shut up, which if it was an ordinary contented viewer, he sort of would be saying, I submit to you, that he would be saying, won't you shut up, lest you get me irritated, annoyed, less contented. But how about local conditions? If they said it, or it, would be more on the basis of, won't you shut up? Leastwise, someone paint their roaches. Definition desk again. I'm going to read just a couple of these. We won't go in, but if I may, again, calling upon our fine combined legal background of here at the station, I submit to you. Is that a weasel's way out or not? I submit to you. This definition, being really civilized. The attempt to cure being merely civilized. At least I didn't beat it into the ground, because there could have been one on top of that, you understand? It's always that. In fact, there is one. It continues to go, because as soon as one era, one epoch, one generation looks at the others and says, well, we've got to improve on things. See this? We have got to develop more so our human attributes. What are they saying? They're saying, without any doubt, we have got to be more civilized than our forefathers in the previous generation. And they've got, figuratively speaking, unlimited sources of examples. We have got to do better by the environment. We have got to cease all forms of nationalistic conflicts. Hey, enough's enough. This is the year down near 2000. We got to stop wars. Come on, shape up. And everybody goes, yeah, let's shape up. They're attempting to cure civilization. They're attempting to cure being civilized. Now see, I sort of reversed it, but now back to the definition. Being really civilized. This is not just a definition of being civilized, you understand. We've done that. This is being really civilized, like every generation, the instant. The younger part of any generation, they're attempting to be really civilized, whatever they call it. You could call it really being fashionable, really being hip, but it's really being civilized. Being really civilized, the definition, the attempt to cure, the remedial attempt. The attempt to cure being, just civilized. Well, that's not enough, because it's never enough. You've always got to be more civilized. But think about what it is. They think being civilized is a cure for being uncivilized. It's a cure for being merely civilized. It's a cure for not being civilized enough. It's not a cure for being uncivilized. Because if you're uncivilized, you're not going to be civilized. Those who have worked their way up in life, worked their way up to living now in the penthouse, they don't really want to believe, they don't want to think about, but they don't want to believe that there are people still sweating and slaving away in the basement. It is too close to the concept of being, what should we call it? How about uncivilized? All right. I thought we just cured that. Man's most important. I'll read this one since it brought a absolute chilling wind when it was read, evidently. Man's most important job is to keep his genes going. A thinker's most important job is not to think about it. May I, for you, go and do all that? Like, that can't be true. One other from last time. Maybe I'll dig it back up anyway again. But when I started the jokes about the battle at Marathon, and of course now you begin to frighten me. I got no reaction. That Marathon Oil Company used to have retail stations, and I started all that, and then even got into Sparta. Well, if you recall, and I didn't give the full detail. I know we pulled it out before, but it's close to some of the things I was talking about, and since I brought it up in another context. But the apocryphal stories of Sparta, back during their recent unpleasantness with the Athenians. For those of you, anyway, it doesn't matter. You know we're not discussing history, literally. But the idea that Sparta was the original, and even still considered now by many, the archetypical militaristic state. It was not only that children, when they were born, there are stories that said that half the females were just immediately killed. That's one of the stories. All the male children that showed any deformity, just as soon as they were born, they just threw them off cliffs. And then there were, it even went further. At the age of 5 or 6, they were taken away from their family. And, they lived under military conditions. It was them. Hey, don't look at me. But there was another one that I didn't. It was besides the one that I didn't bring out again. That it's been years since we mentioned, but it's really connected with this. Now understand. Now let's take it symbolically. Not just metaphorically, because I'm not even talking about that, of it being metaphorical, that I'm meaning that and something else. Because I'm not even meaning that. That's of no consequence to thinking. But note that what they did, forget now the sexist part, because it was simply a matter of militaristic at the time. In this sense, it is symbolically. It doesn't matter anyway, but that's why I'm saying men as opposed to the women, or the female children. The male children are all children. But now consider, we weren't talking about physical children. We're talking about the beginning, the early stages of Western civilization, speech and history. That any child that showed any deformity just on sight, as soon as he sprang out from his mother's womb, as they say, nobody seemed to like it except the man who read it, the man who spoke to the crop of his crotch. I refrained from throwing in there to tell you what that was taken from, but some of you seem to have finally got it. At any rate, as soon as the idea is, the children sprang from their mother's womb, if they showed any deformity, short a finger, an arm twisted, their eye didn't look clear, they had this cliff. Supposedly, it even had a name, I can't remember it, but that it was just a formality. Just as soon as they just threw him, just didn't think a thing. They just grabbed the kid and threw him off the cliff to his death. All right, besides all of that, now, that was to take care of that. Then those that they didn't see anything wrong with, they immediately took them up to, they lived right there by the mountains, but there was to cold streams, ice cold stream up there, and as soon as when they had, they'd thrown away all the deformed kids, but they took the ones that looked all right, and they'd go up there and drop them into the stream, and it was like 200 or 300 yards downstream or something. One guy dropped them, one general, and it was like 200 or 300 yards downstream. This, ice cold. Anyway, with somebody else that stood there, and if he thought about it, he fished out the kid after he floated down. And if he was alive, hey, he was all right. And of course, if he wasn't, he went over the cliff with those that were deformed anyway. That is not given, even though it's very likely apocryphal, or it could be. And as I said, we're not even speaking metaphorically because it doesn't matter. It's of no interest. It's symbolically. But consider, then it had to survive, if it seemed to be, at birth. Sans defect. They still put it to an ultimate test. They threw it in that which would very likely kill an average adult Spartan. Idea. A person. Damn, I get confused. That's what happens when you talk too long. And they let it go through this procedure that under just reasonable conditions would have probably killed an ordinary person, soldier. You know what I mean. History can be interesting if you don't believe it's history.